everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I just wanted to have like a chat. Maybe we can have a drink together. I just have a cup of tea here. And I wanted to start off my inner child series. And I'm just gonna start basically with an intro video, just like how to get started, some decks that I think would be a great start. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that I do inner child work based off of my intuition. It's just purely intuitive. It didn't start off as inner child work, it just kind of went in that direction because of my guides. So I didn't really understand at first that I was connecting with my inner child. I slowly started to pick that up over some time. So I have my journal here, cup of tea, some notes, some decks, and let's get started. So first and foremost, as mentioned, this is my experience and it's purely intuitive. So it might be a little bit different for you depending on your situations growing up, depending on what your team, your spiritual team wants to speak with you regarding inner child work and matters. So I first started building a connection and relationship with my inner child. So I started to notice a lot of synchronicities and parallels to my adult self as I am now, and the connection with my inner child. There were a lot of parallels between how I am now to how I was as a child. So for starters, I was pretty overweight as a child up until I was about 16. I started losing weight. So that was a significant thing for me. After I had my daughter, I struggled to lose weight, and as a child I was very uncomfortable with my weight, and I was pretty overweight. I was pretty heavy as a child all throughout my childhood up until I was in high school. So that was one parallel. Another one was, I've mentioned on my channel before, I was very passionate about makeup. I think like once I hit high school, like maybe the end of high school to when I entered adulthood, very passionate about makeup. I had a huge collection and I really loved color. I expressed myself with color. I wore every colored eyeshadow you could think of, every colored lip except like purple or black. I didn't like the way that it looked on my lips. So that's the only thing that I just tended to stick with pinks, nudes, or reds, plums, mauves for the lips, but my eyes were just about anything I would put on my eyes. So I stopped after I had my daughter. I stopped putting makeup on. It just didn't resonate anymore, and that was another kind of, I think, weird parallel to when I was a child. I didn't wear makeup as a child. I also tied my hair back a lot. I had my hair up in a ponytail a lot as a child, and I didn't let my hair down much after I had a daughter because I was losing my hair, as you typically do after you have a child. So I tended to just keep my hair up all the time. Anyway, so just some interesting, weird parallels. Another thing is I started being very drawn to art again, creating art. That was a huge thing that I did as a child. With the upbringing that I had, we had like a very bizarre situation at home. My parents, as I've mentioned, my dad has very severe issues with addiction. He's a very severe alcoholic. So they had like a weird arrangement with my grandparents. So I would stay with them Monday to Friday, and then I would go home on the weekends, which was probably the worst situation for me and my sister, because my dad was home on the weekends because he wasn't working. So that's a completely other story. And my grandmother, she's my dad's mother. I have a whole other series of situations with her, but she is a clean freak. So we weren't really allowed outside of the home. And when we were with her Monday to Friday, I'd go to school. And then for the most part, she didn't want us to mess up her house or dirty her house. So she would just have us stay in the basement and watch TV. And one of the other things that I could do was I could color and draw. So I picked it up fairly quickly. It sort of runs in the family. My dad can draw. So I'm not sure who he got that from, but I'm well aware that he could draw, and then I picked it up as well. So, and I have other family members who can draw as well. So I definitely know it runs in the family. So I picked that back up again. And before this recent period in my life, I hadn't drawn for years, all throughout my late teens to my mid 20s maybe, or even late 20s. I rarely drew. If I drew at all, it was very rare. So I would say you might find yourself being drawn to things that you loved as a child. You'll probably consider picking things back up again. And I would start there and sort of building that connection and relationship with your inner child. If you're going through a significant period in your life, or like a huge change in your life, you're probably going to find yourself drawn to things that you were as a child. If your inner child wants to come and have this dialogue with you, if it's time for you to explore maybe some childhood trauma, transitions, like significant transitions and transformations can trigger that. So you could find yourself in a similar situation as me, as where, you know, I became a mom and then it triggered all this dialogue with my inner child, basically. I started finding myself drawn to not only all these aspects that are from my childhood, but I started working on my shadow work. I started working on some of the a lot of the self-doubt that I experienced. I started working on a lot of the patterns, like negative patterns that I had inherited through my childhood by my parents and my grandparents in some situations. So I started there and then kind of moved on from there to having very specific conversations with my inner child. I've mentioned before, my inner child really wants to explore the theme of empowerment with me. That's a huge aspect. And my inner child, I still to this day, I experience this very protective instinct towards my mother. Having grown up with an abusive alcoholic father, there were times where I had to be protective of my mom, and I've had to confront that and understand that that's not a healthy dynamic between a child and a parent. So that's one of the things that I deal with personally with my inner child. So you might have a completely different experience, or you could have a similar experience to me in that sense. Another thing that comes up too while you're making this connection with your inner child and you're developing that relationship with your inner child is remembering. You'll start to remember what it was like to be a child. For me, it was my daughter that brought a lot of these things up again. I would see how she would interact with objects, the excitement that she would have whenever we would do something new. So for me, that reminded me what it was like to be a child, and that was also like a way for me to connect with my own inner child. Every time I play with my daughter, it's an opportunity for me to release my inner child. And I have these really beautiful moments with all the children in my life and with my own daughter where I get to remember what it's like to be a child and live, I guess, vicariously, if that makes any sense. But that was a huge thing for me. That was a huge way for me to connect to my inner child and really develop this relationship energetically and bring my inner child to the surface. I don't know about you, but for me, I avoided my inner child like the plague. I didn't want anything to do with her until I had my daughter, and like I said, I didn't realize it at first. She was coming out. She was sort of bubbling to the surface every chance she could get. And after I started noticing the synchronicities, I started seeing the signs, I recommend a journal. I just have this. It doesn't even have to be expensive. If that's the route you want to go, that's totally up to you. I just got this one from my dollar store. I absolutely love it. And once you start to see the signs, you start to get the synchronicities, write them down in your journal. Because you can create and develop a dialogue that way too, and you'll start to see what your inner child wants to talk to you about over time. So this has been, I can't replace it. It's been so crucial in my conversations with my inner child and understanding the parallels and understanding the direction that we're going in. So even in creating this video, I started to notice other things and other signs that are not even related to inner child work, but it's just very interesting what you can pick up after some time and you go back and you read it. So I definitely recommend having some way to record your day-to-day life, especially when you start this work. Yeah, so specifically here, I started to notice that I felt like I was reverting back into my inner child self, as I mentioned. I put it in my journal. So there was the weight gain, the lack of makeup, my witchy obsession, anime, games, and art, etc. And then I just made a note, I want to give my younger self the love and affection she never had. So I've mentioned so many times before, I think because the main dialogue that my inner child wants to speak with me about is empowerment. I think that's why, as a child, I was so incredibly drawn to witchy stuff, I said, but it's like witches. Like, witches fascinated me as a child, Sailor Moon, as well as superheroes, particularly X-Men. I was obsessed with all of those things. And it was because the idea of having superpowers or magical abilities just fascinated me as a child, because there were periods in my childhood where I just felt so incredibly powerless. I had no power to change the situations or to change my environment. So for me, it was just so fascinating to have these abilities that I didn't have. So for me, a huge way for me to connect to my inner child was getting back into games, anime, and witchy stuff. So even later on in the series, when I go through decks and stuff, that because I realized that that's what my inner child wanted to dialogue with me about, you'll see that theme throughout all the divination tools that I show you. So I would say kind of start there, just figure out what your inner child wants to talk to you about. And really the way you can accomplish this is just creating that connection again, creating that safe space. And people can accomplish this in so many different ways. Mine was purely intuitive. It was very intuitive. It started with signs and synchronicities, and then it just kind of evolved from there naturally. So, like I said, I started to notice, the similarities between my childhood and adulthood, and then it kind of moved on from there. And like I said, my journal has been it's been probably the most helpful and useful tool in that. So kind of starting there, if you think that you're being confronted, or if you find that your inner child is sort of bubbling to the surface, like with mine just kind of, eventually she just said, hey, I'm here. you got to do something. And I eventually did. So, I slowly. It's like with a person, I guess, for me, it was slow, started building the connection, and we kind of just moved from there. I am a water sign. Your experience could be different because you might want to approach your inner child in a completely different way, and that's cool. This is just my experience. This is what I found to be this is what I found to work for me. So, all throughout the beginning of my journey with my inner child work, I worked with a whole bunch of different decks. I found that the most maybe influential decks, or the decks that I think would be a great starting space until you realize, maybe your perfect decks for having dialogues with your inner child. You might want to start with, here I have the Flow Tarot, so I just have it in the little bag that it comes with. You can get this on Etsy. It's an independently produced deck. This is a purely water deck, but it is a beauty to read. She is also very compassionate and very gentle. She's very sweet. I call her she. But this, if you have a copy of this deck kicking around, this could be a good place to start, especially if you do have a lot of childhood trauma and you don't want to start with something super confrontational. It's a way for you to start without, getting to the grittier aspects of inner child work. So that's the Flow Tarot. Again, you can get this on Etsy. The next two decks that I have here are Oracle, and I like Oracle decks because like I said, I work my inner child work very intuitively. So this is the Botanical Oracle. So I realized that I think because I connect with Hecate, she's my matron deity, by the way. I work with her as a mother archetype. So we would deal with inner child themes occasionally. And this is the deck that I like to work with her the most with. So I can't remember. This is the Botanical Oracle by, you can get it on Etsy. It's by For Strange Women. So because I like to work with this deck very intuitively, I found that it worked pretty well in regards to the dialogues that I was having with Hecate about inner child stuff. So you could use a deck that you are very intuitively drawn to do this type of work. If you're planning on doing inner child work intuitively like I do. My last deck of choice here is the Talisman Oracle. This is published by US Games. Yeah, US Games, so you can get this mass market. You can get it just about anywhere you can get your tarot decks. So again, it's very easy to read intuitively, and you have additional tools from the deck that you can work with. There's animals, there's symbols, so there's plenty of things to work with in the imagery. I like this deck for shadow work, for inner child work, and just divination, even deity work. I like the dark and light theme, and I mean like the dark background with the light image. So it also comes with like a tracing paper, so you can trace the cards and use them as a talisman. That's why it's called the Talisman Oracle, I'm pretty sure. So I find this deck to be a handy tool in your arsenal when you're when you're doing inner child work. So, but to be honest with you, nature was a huge way for me to connect to my inner child. Noticing this, like, symbols, synchronicities. I would notice specific animals or repeated animals too. And I would research. I do a lot of research on some of the symbols, animals, etc. That I kept repeatedly seeing. I do work with 2 deities for inner child work. Not that that's a route that you have to go. And maybe I'll get into that a little bit later in the series, maybe in the next one. One of them is Hecate. And that I think is just because she comes through as a mother archetype for me, or great mother. So you might have a similar experience if you connect with a mother archetype. I could see that being something that you can, or that's a path that you can take with that archetype, or that god or goddess might want to come through and speak to you in regards to those inner child matters that you're dealing with. I have another deity that is probably going to shock you, because I had no idea that you could even work with this deity this way. So I've never heard of it before. I tried doing research. I can't really find anything about it. So I'm sure that'll be interesting for some of you to find out. But I think that this is a great place to conclude the video. As I said, it's just an introduction, and just a good place for you to start. And then as the series progresses, we can start talking about more specific stuff. But you got to start somewhere, right? And I think that this is a great foundation for you to start. Let me know what you're doing, how you're finding inner child work, like how your experience is. So I'm really interested to know. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Yule, Merry Christmas, whatever you celebrate. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.